I'll let Vivek take over and start his presentation.
Thanks, Sagar. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Okay, please let me know once my screen is visible.
Yeah, it's visible.
Great. Okay, so today's is the first session on JavaScript foundations, and it is on array functions, in particularly map, filter, and reduce. And I'm Vivek Agarwal. And the uh, main reason for keeping this session is to, um, to explain a little bit more about the reduce function, because I've seen like over many weeks, many months that reduce is the most powerful and the most flexible array function, yet it's the most underutilized and most misunderstood array function. So we'll start with map, and please feel free to ask me any questions. Okay, please feel free to interrupt me and ask any questions in middle. So every array function basically, iterates through each and every item of the array. Okay, so a map function takes in a callback function. A function is passed in as an argument in JavaScript. It is called a callback function or an argument function, and it keeps receiving each item of the original array one by one. So it receives the first item, and then based on the logic written in the function, suppose we have written that we need to return the first and the last item. So it will do the processing and um, return the name in which we have concatenated the first and the last name. So this is the mental model behind the map function. It is quite important to get familiar with the thought process behind a function before getting into actual implementation. So we can see that the value that we return from the callback function becomes an item of the new array. And this is really important. We'll see why in just a bit. Okay, so let's look into an example now. So we have a developers array, for example. Okay, so it has a few fields like first, last, department, commits, and I'll comment these out. And now we need to return something like, you know, um, something like uh, John and so on. Okay, so we need to concat the first name and the last name and return an array. And here, since we are returning the exact same number of items as the original array, and we are doing some manipulations on the way, so map is a great function for that. So we start with the array, and we call the map function on that array. It takes in a function. That function gets access to each item of the array. We can name it anything. We can name it item, we can name it person, anything. And then we return anything from the, we can extract anything from the person. We have this complete thing available to us. So let us return the item dot first. Okay, and we can save this in a brand new array. So let mapped array is equal to the result of the map function. And if we save it, we'll see that we get a new array with first name of all the three developers in our original array. Okay, any questions here? I will take it as a no. Okay, so I'll summarize the map function.
Vivek,
So yeah, please.
can you just, elaborate about that let?
Yeah, sure, dear. Okay, So let is just like, there are three ways to declare variables in JavaScript: var, let, and const. Okay. Let is just a way of declaring variable from ES6 onwards. And there are some subtle differences. For example, Rajiv, actually, it will need a bit of examples, but um, a very, a very common thing is that var is function scoped and let is block scoped. So what do I mean by that? Suppose I have a function here. I have a variable here called, suppose, var Rajiv, okay, equals to, say, for example, I'll give it a number, okay, and I have a function here, say function anything, xyz, and here again, I have Rajiv, okay, var, or anything else, suppose var Mohit, okay. So I have a variable inside a function here, okay. So the scope of this Mohit remains, in this function. But anywhere else, if we use, for example, curly brackets, if we use if else anywhere, so anywhere we use these curly brackets, that is called a block scope. Actually, it does not respect, var does not respect that block scope. It just pollutes out to the global scope. So if I have declared anything here, okay, so that is actually present in the global scope. So that can be called as one major difference between var and let, block scope versus the function scope. Rest, everything mostly remains the same. And yeah, in the foundation series, one complete session we are planning to take, that is on differences between var, let, const, and the arrow functions and the normal functions. So for now, I think uh, the let is block scoped and var is function scoped. I think that can be a reasonable answer for now.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, dear. Okay. So regarding the map function, so if we need a new array with exact same number of items as the old one, it's a great candidate. There is no way to skip any elements in a map call. And map takes a function as an argument, and arguments get each item of the array, and return from the argument function becomes the item of the new array. Okay. And now let's move into filter function. So filter again, takes in an argument function, and it gets access to each item one by one. Yeah, the important thing is how it handles what we return from the argument function. So in the map function, if this argument function returned a name, suppose John, so it used to become the new item of our new array, okay? In the filter function, if it receives any truthy value, we get this item in the new array. If it returns a falsy value, this item is just skipped and filtered out from the array. In JavaScript, 0, null, undefined, false, and nan, and empty string. These are falsy values. Rest everything else is a truthy value. Okay. So for example, in the first iteration, it gets this particular item. We write a logic which returns basically say true. True is a truthy value. So this item will be retained in our new array. Then it moves to the next item. Based on the logic that we have written inside the argument function, if it returns false, the item will be, it won't be included. It will be excluded from the new array. And similarly, if the third item returns true or any of the truthy values, it is retained in the array. Okay. And I have prepared again a very simple example of filter functions. Again, I haven't used the same array. So, it's simple for us. And here, um, this is the developers array. I have called filter function on it. It takes in argument function. It gets access to each item one by one. And I have returned item.departments equal to BE. So at any iteration, item.department equals to BE can either be true or false. Okay. So for the first iteration, it will be false. So it will be excluded. For the second, department BE is true. So we will get that as a part of our new array, filtered array. And for the third iteration, again, department B is true. So we will get this third item as a part of our array. Okay, let's save it. And see what we get. So as a result, we get an array of 2 objects with both the backend developers. Okay. Any questions, or shall we move to the most complicated one, the reduce function? Okay, let's move to the reduce function. Does it make sense, the difference between filter and map? So the major difference is how the return value is, handled in filtered and map. Okay. Okay, so how reduce function is actually the most general purpose of all of them. And the reason for the confusion is, usually reduce function is defined as, if you want to reduce things to one value, or most of the definitions and images that we see online, they are like kind of deceptive. Actually, reduce is the most general purpose and the most powerful function. And if you look at the frameworks like React and all, so much of the source code is written in reduce function. Okay, so the reduce function takes in a function and an initial value. So this initial value makes it a bit different from the map and the filter function. The initial value is usually of the same shape of the return value. We'll just look at it in a bit. And the argument function receives each item of the array. This is again same as map, but at the same time, it also has access to an accumulated value on every iteration. Okay, we'll look at it with an example, then it will make much more sense. So this is an array. We are calling a reduce function here. And this reduce function takes in a callback function and an initial value. Okay, we want result to be something like this, even though this is an array, we need an object with a property backend with list of all the backend developers, and the second property frontend with list of all the frontend developers. So it's a fairly complicated task. At the same time, it's a very real world task. Usually we have to massage the data that we receive from API calls. So here, the reduce function can take anything. So it gets access to the very first item in the first iteration. And in the very first iteration, the accumulated value is the initial value that we have provided. Okay. And we write some logic. For example, we write that if we check if the department is front end, then accumulated values backend property add or push one more item to it. Okay. So this way, here we can add one item to the accumulated value. Now for the second iteration, can someone tell me what is the accumulated value, or please feel free to unmute and tell me what access to what all items do we have, so I know we are moving on the right track. Anyone?
B would be James. Jane, sorry, Jane.
Right. Thanks, Shubhajit. So basically, the return of the last iteration is our accumulator of the current iteration. So in the very first iteration, we added John to the FE. Okay. So in the second iteration, our accumulator is exactly same thing, which we see here in the right. This is our accumulator, and our current item is this, the first chain thing. So again, we get access to the item. We can write some logic, and we can maybe, add something to the backend. Okay. So this is a bit important, that what we return from a reduce function becomes the accumulator for the next iteration. Hopefully our example will make it a bit more clear. Okay. So we have the same array, developers array, with first name with John, Jane, and James. Okay. And I will maybe comment it out and we'll write everything from scratch. Okay, so to begin with, we need data in this format. And all the backend names of all the backend developers must be listed here. James and Jane. And all the front-end developers' name must be listed here. Okay, so how would we do it normally using JavaScript? So let's try it using reduce function. And the basic purpose of reduce function is this: when we need to drastically change maybe data's format. So we will declare a new array called reduced array. And we will call reduce function on the developers array. Okay, so it takes in one function, a callback function, and an initial value. And the initial value is of the same shape as the end result that we want. So we want an object with a key of backend. And of course, we can make this dynamic, so things keeps adding on its own. And front end, which is again an empty array to begin with. Okay. Why is it complaining? FE and PE. Okay. Now, in every iteration, we are getting access to accumulator and the current item. Okay. Now we have to check if the current items department is backend, then we need to push the item to accumulators backend property. Does this line of code make any sense? Dot name else accumulator dot be dot push dot fe dot push item dot name. And we can, and then we return the accumulator. I have made some mistake here. I don't know what. Yeah. I'm getting blank because of so many, champions sitting right in front of me. So my mind is getting all blank. Okay. So here we get, what we were looking for. No, it is undefined.
Yeah, variable name of item dot first or item dot last.
Thank you, Mohit. Item dot first ले लेते हैं. Yeah. So we have our, result in a completely different format the way we wanted it. Okay. If anyone needs any explanation in this line of code, kindly feel free to ask. Basically what we are doing it in every iteration, we are checking if the item department is BE, we are pushing that item's first name to the accumulator's backend property. Else we are pushing the item's first name to the accumulator's front end property. As simple as that. Okay. So, I mean, it's worth investing some time, the reduce function. It makes our code much more cleaner and much more, and once we start to understand it, once we are, comfortable with the mental model behind it, that's why, I took this time to, make sure that we are clear with how it works. Okay. So in every iteration, we get the item, we get the accumulator, and the return of the argument function becomes our next items accumulator. So this is
this
pretty much
case
it.
sensitive?
Yeah, please.
Is this case sensitive?
Yeah, map and reduce, yeah, they are case
All
sensitive.
these functions are case sensitive, right?
Yes, Kiran.
Okay.
Dear. So, to summarize quickly, the reduce function is the most general purpose of all the array functions. Reduce function can return anything, it can return object, it can return a single string value, it can return a number, and it takes an argument function and an initial value. Argument function gets each item of the old array one by one, and argument function also has access to an accumulated value on every iteration. So this last line makes reduce, one of the most powerful functions. So that is pretty much it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Vivek. That was a great session.